You walk into a dealership and you're just browsing. You told yourself that this morning in the mirror. I'm just looking. You even told your partner before you left the house, don't worry, we're not buying anything today. But then a salesman walks up, hands in his pockets, big smile, completely relaxed, like he's just an old friend who happens to work here. And he says, hey, what if I told you you could drive that car right there, the one you've been staring at for the last 5 minutes for just $299 a month? And something in your brain just shifts. Because $299 a month sounds nothing like $42,000. It sounds like a streaming subscription. It sounds like a gym membership you actually use. It sounds like something you can handle, something responsible almost. And before you even realize what's happening, you're sitting in a leather chair, someone's brought you a coffee, and you're nodding along while a man in a tucked-in shirt explains terms you're too proud to admit you don't fully understand. That's the trap, and millions of people fall into it every single year. Not because they're stupid, but because the trap is genuinely well designed. Today, we're breaking down one of the most misunderstood financial decisions most people will ever make: leasing versus buying a car. And I'm not going to give you the soft version. I'm going to show you exactly what the numbers look like, who actually wins in each scenario, and why the car industry has spent decades making sure you don't think too hard about this. Because the moment you start thinking clearly about it, the whole game changes. My name is Max. Let's get into it. What leasing actually is, and what they don't tell you. Let's start with the basics, because I think a lot of people sign lease agreements without actually understanding what they're signing. And that's not an accident. When you lease a car, you do not own that car. Full stop. What you're doing is essentially renting it from the manufacturer or the financial arm of the dealership for a set period, usually 24 to 36 months. During that time, you're paying for the depreciation of the vehicle, plus interest, plus fees. And at the end of the lease, you hand the keys back, and you walk away with absolutely nothing. No asset, no equity, no trade-in value, zero. The monthly payment feels low because you're not paying for the whole car. You're only paying for the chunk of value the car loses while you're using it. Sounds reasonable in theory. But let's look at what this actually costs you in practice. Say you lease a $40,000 car. Over 3 years, that car might depreciate by around $15,000 to $18,000. That's what you're financing. Add in the money factor, which is just the lease version of an interest rate, and dealers love to quote it in a confusing decimal format, so you can't easily compare it to a normal APR. And you're looking at a monthly payment that might feel manageable, but is quietly doing serious damage to your long-term financial picture. Now here's the part that really stings. At the end of 36 months, you've paid, let's say, $12,000 in lease payments, and you own nothing. The dealership takes the car back, runs it through their certified pre-owned program, resells it at a profit, and pockets that remaining value. You were essentially a very convenient customer who absorbed the most expensive part of car ownership, the brutal early depreciation years, and then handed the asset back, right when it starts to stabilize in value. You took all the risk of the steep part of the curve and gave them the flat part. Think about that for a second. You paid to lose money on someone else's asset. The lease loop. How people get stuck forever. This is where it gets really important, and this is the part the industry absolutely loves. This is where a one-time decision quietly becomes a permanent financial condition. There's a psychological phenomenon that happens when your lease ends. You've been driving a nice new car for 3 years. Everything works perfectly. The tech is current. The seats still feel fresh. The infotainment doesn't lag. And then someone tells you, hey, for just a little bit more per month, you can be in the new model. Bigger screen, better safety features, updated exterior, that new car smell all over again. The alternative? Buying a used car or keeping an older vehicle, which, even if it's objectively the smarter, financial move feels like a step backward, feels like admitting defeat somehow. And our brains are not wired to choose the option that feels like a downgrade, even when the spreadsheet screams otherwise. So people release, and then they release again, and then again. And suddenly you've got someone who has been paying $350 a month for a car, every single month, for 12 years straight. That's $50,400 paid. And they have nothing to show for it. No car, no asset, no residual value. Just a long list of monthly debits on a bank statement and the vague memory of how good those new cars smelled. This is what I call the lease loop. And it is one of the most effective, low-drama, completely normalized wealth-draining mechanisms that exists in everyday personal finance. Because it doesn't feel dangerous. It feels like just having a car. It feels like everyone does it. And that last part, unfortunately, is increasingly true. What buying actually does to your finances. Now, I want to be completely fair here. Because buying a car isn't automatically a brilliant financial decision either. The math depends heavily on what you buy, how you finance it, and what you do afterward. But let's run the comparison honestly. You buy that same $40,000 car. You put $5,000 down, finance the rest over 5 years at a reasonable interest rate. Your monthly payment is going to be somewhere around $650 to $700 a month. Yes. That's significantly higher than the lease payment, often almost double. And that gap is exactly why the salesman opens with the monthly payment conversation. He knows that number wins the room. But here's what changes everything. After 5 years, you own the car. Outright. A $40,000 car after 5 years, depending on make and model, might still be worth $16,000 to $22,000. That's not nothing. That's a real asset you can sell, trade in, keep as a second vehicle, or hand to your kid when they turn 17. It has value. It's yours. But even better, and this is the part that almost never gets mentioned, once that loan is paid off, your monthly car payment drops to zero. You could keep driving that same car for another 4 or 5 years and pay nothing beyond maintenance and insurance. Suddenly, you've got $700 a month freed up in your budget every single month. That's $8,400 a year. That's a vacation. That's a solid contribution to an investment account. That's real financial momentum that the lease customer simply does not have access to because their payment never ends. Over a 10-year period, the contrast becomes impossible to ignore. The lease customer might spend $40,000 to $50,000 and own nothing at the end. The buyer spends more in the first 5 years, yes, but finishes the decade with a paid-off vehicle, years of zero payments, and the compounding effect of that freed-up cash going somewhere useful. The hidden costs of leasing that nobody talks about. Okay, so we've covered the big picture, but I want to go deeper because leasing has a collection of hidden traps inside it that only reveal themselves later, usually at the worst possible time when you're already committed. Mileage limits. Every lease comes with an annual mileage cap, typically somewhere between 10,000 and 15,000 miles per year. If you go over that number, you pay a penalty per mile, usually between 15 and 30 cents. That sounds insignificant. It's not. If you're 6,000 miles over at the end of a 3-year lease, you're looking at anywhere from $900 to $1,800 due on the spot, the day you return the car. And life doesn't always respect mileage caps. New job with a longer commute, a cross-country road trip, a family situation that has you driving more than expected. The meter is always running. Wear and tear fees. When you return a leased car, it goes through a formal inspection. And the dealer's definition of normal wear and tear is very different from yours. A small parking lot door, ding, slightly low tire tread, a scuff on the interior trim. These things can each carry a charge. By the time you add them up, you can walk into a lease return expecting to hand over keys and walk out, and instead write a check for several $100s. You maintained someone else's asset at your own expense and then paid extra for not maintaining it well enough. Early termination penalties. Life changes. That's not a cliche, it's just true. Jobs change, families grow, financial situations shift. What happens if you genuinely need to exit a lease 18 months in? Early termination fees can be brutal, sometimes equal to the remaining payments on the entire lease. You could owe $6,000 to $10,000 to escape a contract that no longer fits your life. With a car you own, at least you have an asset you can sell to cover the loan. With a lease, you're paying to get out of an obligation with nothing on the other side. Gap exposure. If your leased car is totaled or stolen, your regular insurance pays the current market value of the vehicle. But you still owe the remaining lease payments, plus potentially additional fees. The gap between those two numbers, what insurance covers and what you owe, can be several $1,000s. Some leases include gap coverage, many don't, and most people never think to check until it's too late. When does leasing actually make sense? I'm not here to tell you leasing is wrong in every single situation. That would be intellectually dishonest, and you'd be right to call it out. There are specific scenarios where leasing is the genuinely smart move. If you are a business owner or self-employed professional, leasing a vehicle used for business purposes can come with real tax advantages. In many countries and jurisdictions, lease payments on a business vehicle are deductible as an operating expense, often more favorably than depreciation on a purchased vehicle. If you're running a business and your accountant knows what they're doing, this is a conversation worth having seriously. If you need a new, reliable vehicle every 2 to 3 years for professional image reasons, real estate, executive roles, client-facing sales positions, and you can negotiate aggressively on the money factor and residual value, leasing can pencil out. Key phrase, can negotiate. Most people never negotiate anything beyond the monthly payment number. That's the mistake. If you drive genuinely low mileage, well under the cap, and you keep your cars in excellent condition, many of the hidden cost risks are substantially reduced. But here's the honest truth for the average person. If you lease, return it, and lease again and again, leasing is one of the most expensive ways to simply have access to transportation, and it is sold as the affordable option. That tension between perception and reality is worth sitting with. The car salesman's playbook and how to see through it. Let me pull back the curtain, because understanding how you're being sold to is genuinely one of the most valuable things you can walk away with from this video. Dealers profit from leases in multiple ways that are deliberately opaque. The money factor has a built-in dealer markup above the manufacturer's base buy rate, and this markup is rarely disclosed unless you specifically ask for it. The residual value, the car's predicted worth at lease end, is set by the manufacturer's financial arm, which has its own interest in making the numbers look attractive. Neither of these figures are negotiated naturally. You have to know to ask. And here's the core manipulation. Dealers are trained to anchor the entire lease conversation around one number, the monthly payment. What are you comfortable with monthly? Once you answer that question, you've lost most of your negotiating leverage without realizing it. Every other variable, down payment, money factor, term length, fees, gets quietly adjusted around your target monthly number while you feel like you won. The correct move is to refuse to discuss monthly payments until the out-the-door selling price of the vehicle has been negotiated down as if you were paying cash. Lock in the lowest possible selling price first. Then, and only then, introduce leasing as a payment structure. This one change in sequencing completely shifts the negotiating dynamic in your favor. The story we tell ourselves about cars. I want to step away from the pure mechanics for a moment and talk about something more uncomfortable, because I think it sits underneath all of this. A lot of people lease cars they cannot genuinely afford to own, and leasing gives them permission to drive those cars anyway. The $58,000 luxury SUV becomes a $490 a month decision, and suddenly it feels within reach, responsible even. But what you're really doing is choosing an identity, a status signal, and paying a permanent monthly fee to rent access to it. There's a reason the average person with genuine long-term wealth drives a 3 to 4-year-old car they own outright. It's not because they can't afford something newer. It's because they made a quiet decision somewhere along the way that a car is a tool, not a trophy. That its job is to move them from one place to another reliably and cheaply, not to announce anything about who they are. The idea that your car reflects your success is one of the most expensive beliefs in personal finance. Not because wanting a nice car is wrong, but because leasing a car you can't afford to buy purely to project an image is one of the fastest ways to guarantee that image stays a projection indefinitely. Buying used. The option nobody wants to hear. If we're being completely honest, and that's the point of this video, the best financial move for most people isn't even leasing versus buying new. It's buying used, and the industry has worked very hard to make that feel like a compromise. A new car loses somewhere between 15% and 25% of its value in its first year. By year 3, it may have shed 40% to 50% of the original purchase price. That depreciation cliff is real, it's steep, and if you buy new, you're the one falling off it. But if you buy a 3-year-old vehicle with 30,000 to 40,000 miles, someone else already paid for that drop. You start lower on the depreciation curve, you pay less for the same functional vehicle, and your total cost of ownership over the life of the car shrinks dramatically. The certified pre-owned market has made this more accessible than ever. Manufacturer-backed inspection programs, extended warranties, and competitive financing have closed the gap between buying new and buying smart. You give up the factory smell and the bragging rights. You keep significantly more of your money. Buy a reliable 3-year-old vehicle. Finance it over 4 years. Pay it off. Keep driving it. That's not exciting content. That's not what car commercials show you. But it is quietly how a lot of financially free people got that way. The real numbers over 20 years. Let me leave you with the final thought experiment, because I think the long view is where this becomes impossible to argue with. Take 2 people, same income, same city. Both need a car at age 25. Person A leases a new car every 3 years for the next 2 decades. Average payment, $400 a month. Over 20 years, they spend $96,000 in lease payments. At 45, they need a car, they go back to the dealership, and the cycle continues. Net vehicle assets accumulated, 0. Person B buys a reliable used car at 25. Monthly payment, $430 for 4 years, then 0 for 3 years while they keep driving it. They repeat this roughly twice over the 2 decades. Total spent on car payments over 20 years, somewhere between $45,000 and $55,000. They also own a car with trade-in value each time they cycle. And during those years of 0 car payments, they invest that $400 a month instead. At a modest average annual return, $400 a month invested over even 7 years of no car payments grows into something genuinely significant. We're talking about a difference in net worth between these 2 people, same income, same life, that could reach 6 figures, driven entirely by one recurring financial decision, made quietly every few years, compounding slowly in one direction or the other. That is the car trap. Not one dramatic mistake, not a single catastrophic purchase, just a monthly habit, repeating itself, moving wealth away from you and toward a system designed to keep it moving exactly that way. The takeaway. So here's where we land. Leasing is not inherently evil, but it is sold aggressively using psychological tools that are specifically designed to make large long-term commitments feel small and manageable. For most people, most of the time, it is one of the most expensive ways to simply have access to a vehicle. And it is consistently marketed as the smart, modern, affordable choice. Buying gives you equity. It gives you an asset. It eventually gives you years of zero payments and the compounding financial freedom that comes with them. Pair that with buying used and skipping the worst of the depreciation curve, and you have one of the most straightforward, unsexy, genuinely effective wealth-building habits available to ordinary people. The dealership doesn't want you running these numbers. They want you in that leather chair focused on one figure nodding along. You just ran the numbers. Now you know what to do with that. If this shifted the way you think about your next car decision, or if someone you know is sitting inside a lease loop right now, send this to them. These are the conversations that actually change things. Max out.